Tonight's another one-off since we have Worship Wednesday. Next week, we're not going to start a new series until we can go a few weeks in a row. But I'm going to start tonight from a very encouraging book, the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, in verse 1. And there were about 2 people who chuckled. I can tell that y'all have read Ecclesiastes recently. It starts off, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. This is why we believe that this was written by King Solomon. We have many reasons to believe that, but we are going to operate under that throughout the rest of the night. He says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Somebody say vanity. Look at your neighbor now and say vanity. Say it without judgment, vanity. Some of y'all believe that a little too much. A few things to point out just from this opening salvo that we just fired. It's that number one, the word preacher is koheleth. And this means one who gathers people together. And so when Solomon says preacher, he's not just referring to himself in the third person. This is something that Solomon does in the book of Ecclesiastes. For the first about 2 verses, and I believe the last 6 verses, Solomon steps out of character and he's speaking as the king. He's speaking as himself. But then when he says koheleth, he's talking about the teacher, and he's actually stepping into what, for lack of a better phrase, I think I would say, is the teacher. And when he says koheleth and he says teacher and preacher in whichever translation that you're using, when he says that, he's talking about somebody that he is portraying in these words. And you'll see him shift in and out of that character throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. And once it's something that's pointed out to you, you can never unsee it again whenever you read this book. The point of koheleth is to instruct and to teach in Ecclesiastes. It's the son of David, and he's looking back at a life of wisdom, but also a life of some missteps. A lot of the missteps of Solomon we are very aware of. We know some of the things that he did wrong. We know the gods that he invited into his land because of his penchant for gathering wives and collecting them like they're some sort of trading card or something. He just had this knack for acquiring wives and concubines. And so you got these missteps in his life, but all the while the wisdom that was granted by God still remains. And so this character that he shifts into, he's pulling from both the wisdom and also the missteps, and also even the words that he used to utter aloud are the things that he would used to think. There's a shift that takes place at the beginning and the end of Ecclesiastes. At the very beginning, it's very short, but he immediately kind of shifts into this character. And except, again, like I said, for the last 6 verses and the first 2 verses, there is the writer, and then there is the character, known as the teacher. And then he keeps uttering this word as many as 38 times, and actually a few other words that kind of fall in line with it. But this word, he keeps saying it is vanity. Vanity. Everything is vanity. All is vanity. Vanity of vanities. And the word that he's using is the Hebrew word Hevel. Everybody say Hevel. That's why it's on the screen. Should be right there in front of you. And when he says vanity of vanities, all is vanity, the way that it reads in Hebrew is Hevel, 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 one after the other. Because in Hebrew, a lot of times they didn't have ways to emphasize words because the vocabulary is much smaller than English. I believe there was a total vocabulary of like 30,000 words as compared to English, which has something like 250,000 words. So in order to emphasize a point, they would just repeat it. And if they repeated it a third time, that we would kind of translate that a different way. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. They would just say Hevel, Hevel, Hevel. And it's important to have this context, because if you just take the word vanity, whether it's in your King James, your ESV, your NASB, whatever you're using, if you just take the word vanity and you're reading Ecclesiastes and you read it the same way that we read the word vanity, you're going to miss a lot of the point. Because when we say vanity, we think that we're meaning like just too much care about your outward appearance. Somebody just kind of, they always look absolutely spotless perfect, and if you reach over there and kind of tussle their hair, I don't know why you would do that, but if you do that, they absolutely freak out, they lose it. This is, we would say, oh, you're being vain. That's too narrow of a definition of what we're reading in Ecclesiastes. When it says vanity, you're going to miss the point if you just kind of narrow it into our definition. Even in our own dictionaries, there's a broader definition of vanity that is very important to know whenever you're reading this book. Vanity, it's something that is vain, empty, or valueless. Vain, empty, or valueless. Another way to say it would be that it's hollow, that it's not anything of any importance whatsoever. It's completely without value. And what could be of less value? What could be more hollow than a vapor that you see for a moment and that it's gone? That's what Hevel is. Hevel means vapor or breath. A lot of different words, you see the definitions, and if you pull up a Strong's Concordance and you start reading it, there will be a lot of different little definitions and used in different ways. The only way that this is used is breath or vapor. This is that vapor, that steam that comes out, right? Sherry noticed that I was losing my voice, and have kind of been losing my voice lately whenever I've been speaking. There's some kind of little issue we're struggling with. And so what she did was she bought me, I should have grabbed it, Sherry, before I came out here. It's just a vaporizer. And so you take this little device, you put this little stuff in it, and then you bring it up to your mouth and you inhale, and it basically just it humidifies your vocal cords. The problem is if you use it, as Sherry discovered while you're driving down the road, it looks like you're the pastor's wife vaping on Airline Drive. So if you see me or Sherry and we're driving somewhere and it looks like we're vaping, by definition we are, but not by culture. We're not. It's completely different. Totally different. It's the appearance. Thank you, Pastor Colin. Oh, it's the very appearance of evil, but it's helping my voice. When it says, again, vanity of vanities, this is Hevel, this is vapor, this is breath, this is something that is gone in an instant. That's the reason I even brought up that vapor, is because I was puffing on it before church Sunday morning, trying to make sure I didn't lose my voice. And this is going through the air, and literally as it's going in the air, I'm thinking Ecclesiastes the whole time. Just because you're just nerdy preacher jokes, and just going in the air, and that's how quickly that it dissipates. And that's like us. If we were to try to grab onto vapor, it just slips through your fingers and it's gone. This is what Solomon was saying over and over again, that life is vapor. Life is gone in an instant. Life just slips through your fingers. You can try to grab hold of it. If you do, completely fruitless. You accomplish nothing, nada. Nothing at all. So Solomon begins expressing just how brutal it is to pursue something that is gone so quickly, something that seems so real, but ultimately is vain, it's empty, it's hollow, it's Hevel. Ecclesiastes 1:3 says, "What advantage does man have in all his work, which he does under the sun? A generation goes, and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also, the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again." He's just talking, life just keeps going on and just keeps changing and keeps changing and keeps changing and keeps marching on. And then here we are trying to operate in this world, but there's just so much of this world that just keeps going on around us. And he says, for all the work that we do, when we're gone, there's going to come a time that we're not remembered. And that's, for some people, that's kind of an insulting thought. Well, will my children not remember me? Of course your children will remember you. Will your grandchildren remember you? Hopefully, yes, your grandchildren will remember you. For a privileged few, even your great-grandchildren might remember you. But somewhere down the line, there's going to be somebody in your family tree trying to look you up on whatever version of Ancestry.com still exists. And they're going to have a hard time trying to find anything out about our lives. Because hopefully by that point, all the Facebook and Twitter servers will have crashed. And so there is no record of this time in human history for most of us. But the point that he is making is that we tend to think that we're doing something of grand importance. But at some point you realize that a lot of what we do is ultimately Hevel. Ecclesiastes 1:5, Also, the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again, blowing toward the south and then turning toward the north. The wind continues swirling around, and on its circular courses, the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. Verse number 10, is there anything of which one might say, see this is new. Already as it has existed for ages, which were before us. There is no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. If you read this, it's actually beautiful, the writing that Solomon does in this passage. However, you read this and you also start getting just a little bit depressed. And that's kind of the point that he's getting at. Over the course of this book, you find that he shifts and he kind of bobs and weaves through a lot of these topics and a lot of these ideas. But what you find is this common feeling, and it starts rising up in you if you really dive into these passages. See, verses 3 through 11 are an opening poem, and they start off together. And the point of these verses is to point out the oppression of time. Time keeps marching on. It keeps on marching on whether or not we're here or we are. It doesn't matter. Time still keeps marching on. God's creation still operates. The tides come in, the tides come out. They do what they do. The moon is going around the sun. Sometimes it's a waning crescent. Sometimes it's a waxing crescent. Sometimes there's no moon at all. It all just keeps marching on no matter what happens with the rest of us. And he's saying in these passages, you can spend your life achieving. You can spend your life conquering. You can spend your life making a name for yourself. But in the end, so much of what we do ultimately is hollow. So much of what we do is Hevel. The sentiment that you see expressed in Solomon's character in Ecclesiastes, the writings that he's placing down, is that of nihilism. You've heard me talk about nihilism from the pulpit before. Nihilism teaches that ultimately life is meaningless. Therefore, morality is meaningless. And therefore, all religion is meaningless. And it just teaches you basically to step back and say, why am I doing any of this at all? I might as well not do it. It's a hopeless ideology. It's a hopeless way of thinking about the world. But what you find, especially in times where a lot of turmoil starts going on, you see a lot more people begin to drift into nihilism. And this is really what Solomon is warning against if you watch the entire thing and you just kind of step back and look at the entirety of Ecclesiastes. This is what he is warning about, that life is not meaningless. The inevitable conclusion of nihilism is selfishness. That's why our flesh tends to drift. Do what you want. Take what you want. Use whatever or whoever that you want. Nothing really matters anyway, so you might as well. And Solomon he's ranting about this in some portions of Ecclesiastes, and you can see the emotion begin to build, and you can actually, there's deep feeling in this book. If you pay attention, I promise you, some of you need to, it's not a long book of the Bible. It's only 12 chapters. You need to read Ecclesiastes in its entirety sometime in one sitting, especially if you're not around other people. And you'll see that there are swells of emotion, and then you find yourself kind of plunging a little bit at times. And Solomon was brilliant with the way that he did this. And then he lifts you back up, and then he breaks character. And in the middle of some of these passages, he kind of steps back and he pulls out of this character of the teacher, and he becomes the writer again. He becomes the old king looking back at a life with plenty of victories but plenty of missteps along the way. And then he just gives you little droplets of truth. He says, this is the way that I felt. This is the way that you will feel at times. But if you just step back and see the whole picture, God has something else he wants you to pay attention to. Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, actually begins ranting even about wisdom itself in verse number 16 of chapter 1. He said, I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me. That's a little boastful claim, but it was true. And my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I realize that this is also striving after wind, because in much wisdom, there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. Solomon, given wisdom by God, ultimately steps back and said, wisdom was awful. It hurt. I saw too much. I knew too much. It didn't feel good when I realized the truth of what was happening around me and in me. It just didn't feel right. Solomon was also one of the richest men to have ever lived. And how do you think that he felt about his riches later in life? You can read about it, chapter 2, verse 9. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities, which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity. All was Hevel, and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Solomon, at the end of his life, he takes a look around and he said, what did all this get me? Why did I put so much emphasis on this? All of it was vapor. All of it was just Hevel. All this stuff, all these possessions, all this knowledge, all of this status. And why didn't any of it make a dent in my soul? This is a book that, again, it kind of weaves in and out, but what you find is that you feel the pain in Solomon. You feel the pain as he looks back, because Solomon, you look at him, he was the son of a king. He had goals in life, a lot of them very attainable for him. He even had God who respected his decision, what he asked for so much that he said, you can have anything that you want. And he said, give me wisdom. And he respected that response so much that he gave him everything else as well. And even with all of that, he looked around and he said, what was it worth? Because I was missing something. All he could think of when he saw all of his accomplishments was Hevel. That's it. In chapter 3, Solomon again obsesses over the passages of time, and there's a time, you know the passage perhaps, there's a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, a time to heal. And he goes on and on and on for the first 9 verses there. And then just briefly after all of that, just briefly, once again, he kind of breaks the fourth wall and he peels back the curtain on this character. And he says in verse 11, he has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning to the end. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it and there is nothing to take from it, for God has so worked that men should fear him. You see this? We're so consumed with what we do in what is happening around us that seems to matter so much, and how quickly all the things that we've got to get done must be done now, and it must be done with excellence, and there's nothing wrong with that, you'll see. But there is something beyond time that is set in our hearts that we cannot get rid of, and we cannot yet fully comprehend it, not until that great and glorious day. Our works are temporary, but his works remain forever. And see, Solomon, again, is in all this weaving that he does, he then very quickly shifts back into gear and goes back into the character in chapter 4, verse 1. Then I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun. And behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them. This is a common refrain. This is something that people bring up a lot. Well, if God exists, then why do bad things happen to good people? Why do all these things happen to bad people that are good? Why do I see good people suffering? It's a common refrain, and you would think that I've called it before, maybe I shouldn't have said it. I'll say it again. But I've called that like the high school philosophy, because whenever a high schooler first finds something they can criticize, that's the argument they go to with God. And later in life, what you find is that people still ask the same question, but they don't ask it directly. They just get quiet about it. They pull back from God a little bit about it. And this is Solomon saying that, look, this was my thought as well. Because with all this wisdom that I was granted, I'm looking around, and with all this knowledge that I have, I see that good people are suffering and bad people are thriving. He actually writes about this some in Proverbs. You can read it there as well. You see that he notices this stuff and it messes with him a little bit. So here's what he does. The character shifts into that of the nihilist. And then in verse number 2, so I congratulated the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still living. But better off than both of them is the one who has never existed, who has never seen the evil activity that is done under the sun. And you can almost, if you pay attention, you can hear Solomon's disdain for the words that he was relaying, the words that he certainly felt and maybe even spoke aloud himself at one point. These thoughts that went through his mind, that unsettled him, that bothered him, that took him off course. And remember, I want you to pay attention, Ecclesiastes is written very differently from Proverbs. Proverbs is wisdom, 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 practical instruction, wisdom, over and over again. And that's why I will always tell Brother Levi, please plug in some Proverbs in these youth services over in Current, because God knows young people need it and we need it too. But this is written very differently from Proverbs. Solomon is now looking back at a life that he is not altogether proud of. And he's got plenty of personal experience to draw from now. And thankfully, he was raw enough about it that he could recount this experience with all the depths of feelings that he had, the regrets that he had, the contempt for some of his own thoughts that he had. He looks and he speaks honestly about all that. And if we're not careful, we might misread some of what he's saying. I heard somebody I've heard this many times actually. I've listened to people preach about the book of Proverbs, and what they say is, Proverbs is all about understanding that you need to appreciate the little things in life, and that you need to, not Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, saying that it's just about knowing that you need to enjoy life. It's like reading the grapes of wrath and being disappointed because there weren't more grapes in it. It's the title. It's not a book about fruit. And if you're hoping for a book about fruit, you're going to be sorely disappointed. If you're reading that into Ecclesiastes, look, it does talk about enjoying life, but this is not the message of Ecclesiastes. It's saying that, sure, enjoy your life, but in the midst of all that, don't forget that that is not what's going to count at the end of your life. It says, of course, enjoy life, but don't do it at the expense of the one thing that truly matters. I might be spoiling the end already, but we'll get there. Solomon is not lying when he says this stuff. So much of life is exactly what he says that it is. It's Hevel. It's vapor, it's breath, it's here and it's gone. And throughout the chapters, Solomon elaborates on all these things. Chapters 3 through 5, he reiterates over and over again that life is monotonous, that a lot of it is just cycling over and over again. A lot of days feel very similar to the days before them. Just do. You find yourself doing things you've done 1,000,000 times over. That's life. It's not altogether a bad thing. In chapter 5 especially, he emphasizes that wealth is Hevel. That wealth itself, it's vapor, it's vanity. It does not last. I remember going in New Orleans, we were walking around one time, we were with some friends, and we go into one of the stores. I actually think that's whenever we had the youth group down there one time. Y'all are thinking, why did y'all bring the youth group to New Orleans? We didn't go to that, for goodness sake. But we went into this old museum that was selling stuff. It wasn't just a museum. They were selling these old artifacts. And a lot of what they were selling were these little Spanish coins that they found sunk down in these ships off in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere, these old Spanish coins. And they're selling these little Spanish coins, but they were not particularly valuable at all. And all I could think of as I was holding this little coin was at some point, somebody probably had this coin in a pouch attached to their belt, and they probably carried a knife to protect it. And now it's just being sold in this random shop, and it means almost nothing to us. I didn't buy it. It was just cool to look at for a second. But it meant something to somebody at some point. The little $10 bill that you have in your wallet, perhaps, it's going to be completely worthless one day. Some of you are like, with inflation, it kind of is right now. That penny, that for some reason, why do we still have pennies? There are a lot of good arguments about getting rid of pennies. It's not going to mean anything. It's not going to mean anything. But it means something right now. All the wealth that we acquire in life, at some point, it's gone. And it means nothing. It's Hevel. Solomon weaves his way through these topics and all these aspects of life. He hits on all the big points. He hits on wealth. He hits on career, status, pleasure. In all of it, he says at the end of every single passage, it's vanity. It's vanity, it's vanity, it's Hevel over and over again. All of this stuff is Hevel. And then once again, he does it again. He pulls back the curtain and he peeks his head in there and he gives us a little glimpse of the truth in chapter 8, verse 12. Although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly. But it will not be well for the evil man, and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God. He does not honor God. He does not respect God. He does not put him at the forefront of his life. Solomon, again, he keeps reaching in there and just kind of dropping a few spoilers all along the way in Ecclesiastes. And he's telling you, yes, life seems futile sometimes. Life can, at some junctures, feel meaningless. Unfair, yes. And everything is vanity. Everything is Hevel. But in the end, is it? Is it truly? Solomon tells us, get on with life. Enjoy life while you can. And in one of the verses he says, a live dog is better than a dead lion. He says, while you're here, it's okay. Just enjoy that, but don't get distracted because all the things that you're enjoying, it's Hevel. You're surrounded by vanity. You're surrounded by this vapor. And then he starts to change things towards the end of the passage. See, throughout the entire book, again, he just keeps on throwing these little points at you. He says a lot of things, and the reason so many people get confused by Ecclesiastes is because a great portion of it is stuff that we would agree with as soon as we read it. I mentioned I talked to my dad this afternoon, but I mentioned it recently. He had a message that I couldn't find it on our webcast because we didn't always put the titles of the sermons. That's because it's before Chris Hunter got a hold of it, and now it's extremely organized and everything is labeled perfectly. But back in the day, everything was not labeled so well. And he had a sermon called Words from a Backslidden Preacher, and it was about the book of Ecclesiastes. And there's some things that Solomon writes, and on the surface, you just want to nod your head, but you take a step back and you read the rest of the Word of God, and you're like, oh, no. He's pulling the wool over our eyes a little bit. He says that to drink and be merry. And then you read the same guy's writings in Proverbs and he says, you better not. And so you're wondering, well, did he change his mind later in life? No, he's telling you, look, this is the mentality that I got pulled into. These are the things that I thought was important. This is the stuff that I dedicated myself to. And then all of a sudden one day I realized, I looked back and I said, oh my goodness. All of it was Hevel. All of it tricked me. It drew me in. How did the wisest man in history get drawn into all the sin that he participated in? It's because he looked at Hevel. For some reason, he thought, looks good. And then in chapter 12, he turns things yet again. And this time he does it with some finality. In verse 1, he says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no delight in them. Before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and clouds return after the rain. Verse 6, remember him before the silver cord is broken and the golden bowl is crushed. The pitcher by the well is shattered and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity. And the reason I want you to read this passage by yourself sometime is because it's at this point that there's a strange feeling that rises up. There's a strange feeling, it causes you to pause. You can't continue easily on to the next verse because you see it's just this weird break that takes place. It feels like a crescendo. And then when you read it alone again, you feel the need to stop, to meditate, to reflect. And then Solomon very abruptly shifts gears. And in verse 9, he says, in addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge. And he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. And you're like, oh, yeah, there you are. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. The words of wise men are like goads, and masters of these collections are like well-driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. But beyond this, my son, be warned. The writing of many books is endless. An excess of devotion to books is wearying to the body. He's looking back and he's talking about his life. Because at first, Solomon writes many proverbs, and after he's reading these proverbs, and probably while he's reading them, he's also reading all the wisdom of man. These wives that he's bringing in from all around the world, he's bringing in their culture as well. He's taking in their lessons. He's taking in their writings. He's speaking from life experience when he writes this passage. And what must have prompted him to write this book is that this man with over 1,000 women in his life, everybody say, phew. Some of y'all are much smarter than others, and you didn't say a thing. Children who carried his name and his blood, but many of them I'm sure he knew almost nothing about. His riches were so vast, much of it he'd never even seen. And it all meant at this point nothing to him. And he knew that it meant nothing. So Solomon steps then completely out of character. In verse number 13, you hear Solomon, you don't hear the teacher. You hear him say these beautiful words. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments. Because this applies to every person, for God will bring every act to judgment. Everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. This is the conclusion of his story. He's telling us, my wisdom ultimately, it didn't really mean anything. My wealth didn't change anything. My wives, I might have gone a little too far. My status on the world stage, it's vapor. It's Hevel. It only left me feeling empty and hollow. What I should have done is just feared God. I should have kept his commandments. I should have worshiped no one else. I should have spent my life with my one wife and the children that we shared together. I should have lived righteously so that I would not approach life's sunset in fear. I ate, I drank, I worked, I climbed, I overthought, I worried, I agonized, and I did all this for what? The message of Ecclesiastes is not to abandon ambition, to abandon the good things of life, to abandon having a good time with your friends and family. It's not that you shouldn't enjoy life. The message of Ecclesiastes is simple. All of it means nothing without God at the forefront of all of it. I love spending time with family. But if none of my family loved God, those meetings would have a lot more sorrow in them. I love being with y'all. But if the presence of God was not in this place, what's the point? It's just a community center at that point. I love life. I do enjoy life. I enjoy laughing with people. I enjoy all. I have hobbies. I enjoy those hobbies. I like LSU. Somebody say amen. I was just giving a few of y'all an opportunity there because I know you wanted to. I never watch it. I enjoy life, but not any of it without God. None of it without God. Because all of it is nothing. It's vapor. It's Hevel. It's empty. It is hollow. I was watching the other day. There was a guy that, I don't know if he still is. I've never heard of the guy, never seen the guy before. All I know is that he was a stand-up comedian at some point, and he apparently wasn't that great at it because he was married, he had kids, and he was completely and utterly broke for years. And he was really bitter about it. He was depressed. His career was not progressing at all. He was really upset about all this. And his marriage was breaking down. It was failing. He and his wife had gotten further and further apart. And he had a friend that he was hanging out with one day. And the friend was, just a guy to hang out with, play golf with. And one day the friend just starts talking about something that he read. And he said, "Where did you read that?" And he said, "I read that in the Bible." He said, "Oh, it's interesting." Because the guy that I'm talking about, I don't know the guy's name. I didn't even look up his name. I'm just calling him Mark. Mark knew nothing about the Bible. And he said, okay, that's interesting. And then later on, he was hanging out with him, and something else came up, and he said, where did you hear that? He said, I read that in the Bible too. He said, you've been reading the Bible a lot. And he said, it's changed my life. He said, I really wish that you would look into it, Mark. And the guy was really not happy about that because he said I had zero interest in it. And he said, Mark, will you just do something with me? He said, I go to this church down, and I think it's in the Nashville area. And he said, I go to this church over there. Would you go with me sometime? And he said, I don't know, man. I don't think I'm going to do that. And he said, well, will you do this? Will you just let me send you these tapes? It must have been a while because he said tapes. And he said, let me send you these tapes, and it's from the Bible series that my pastor is doing. And he said, I really think that you would gain a lot from it. And he said, you can send them to me, but I don't know, man. I'm just probably not going to do anything with it, but you can send it to me. He said, just try. And he said, I'll try. He said, I had no intention of trying. And so these tapes were coming in every single week, and he did nothing with them. He put them in a box, and he put them, he said, under the sink. And over time, these tapes just built up and built up and built up. And then finally, one day, everything came to a boil, and him and his wife had that ultimate fight, and she finally said, I'm done. She said, I've got to get out of here. I'm not calling it quits just yet, but I'm done for now, so I'm gonna pack up everything, and I'm going to get the kids, and we're going to go to my parents. And he said it wasn't even that distraught. It's just like, you know what, this has been building up for a long time. I knew this was inevitable. And she leaves, and he said, I found that box under the sink. And he said, you know what, I've got nothing else to do right now. And he said, I picked up a tape, and he said it was Ecclesiastes. The pastor did a series on Ecclesiastes. And he pops that tape in, and he said, the very first tape that I listened to, he said it started messing with me. He said, years later, somebody asked me, why in the world did you start off with Ecclesiastes? He said, I didn't know anything about the Bible. I had no idea what I was stepping into. He said, so I started listening to these series and listening to this teaching, and this pastor's going on and on about all this stuff, and I'm learning. He said, it touched me so deeply. He said, that was the beginning of me turning my heart over to God. And he said, the reason that it resonated with me so well is because everything in life, I could attest to what the writer was saying. It was all Hevel. It was nothing. Every success I ever had, ultimately, it was nothing. The struggles I had, the things that I thought were important, I was looking back and saying, none of it means anything. But then the ending. You don't know God, do you? He said, that was the beginning of my walk with God. And we can echo the sentiment by telling you the rest of the word and going to 1 John chapter 5, verse 11. And the testimony is this, that God has given us eternal life, and this life is in his Son. He who has the Son has the life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have the life. This life is nothing without Jesus. Your career, thank God for it. Thank God that he gave you an opportunity. But without God, it's nothing. Your family is one of the greatest blessings that you'll ever be given in life. But if y'all don't have God, y'all have a problem. Everything that we do, and again, I know that I'm speaking to the faithful. This is midweek services. I know you're here because you want to. And I know that you're here because we prioritize God. But don't ever get confused. The things that you're worrying about right now, ultimately one day, it's Hevel. The dispute that you have with your brother or sister, that you are still trying to get around and rectify and maybe heal over time, it's Hevel. Because ultimately the only thing that matters is, do you know and fear your God? And has he made a difference in your life? James 5:7. Therefore be patient, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it until it gets the early and late rains. You too, be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. I pray that in these, honestly, not just the latter days, but the latterest of latest days. That doesn't even make sense at all. We see the finish line right now. It's not time to look to the left or to the right. Every single distraction, every single hurdle that we have in life, just put that aside for a moment. And we need to give God every single worry, every single care, every single objective that we have. It all has to be viewed through his lens. And I pray that God would give us a fresh focus every single day. Some of you are tired. It's okay. God's going to give you strength. Some of you are worried. God's going to give you peace. Some of you have challenges. God is going to give you victory. Some of you have nothing but, or everything other than peace. God is going to give you that perfect peace that passes all understanding. God will honor his word as long as we keep him at the forefront of everything that we do. Amen. Let's pray tonight. Father, I pray that you would give us fresh focus. I pray that you would give us fresh healing. I pray that you would give us fresh peace day after day after day. God, don't let us take our eye off the ball at this present time. You're coming back soon for your people. We know that, God. We can see it. Every headline in this world, it all points to one thing, that your prophecy, your word is coming true before our eyes. So, God, we don't just want to be ready for it. We want to anticipate it with joy. We want to do so with focus. We want to look around and win every soul that is within our grasp. God, keep us focused on you. We pray it all in the name of Jesus Christ. And would everybody give God a hand clap of praise before we dismiss this evening?